Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am thrilled to welcome a colleague and friend of mine, Patience Riley. Patience works with me at Postpartum Support International. I'm one of the trainers. She's one of our trainers as well as a communications manager. Patience, thank you so much for saying yes.
Thank you so much for having me here. Me and Devorah could talk for hours and hours, so I'm just happy that you all get a little sneak peek into our conversations.
Absolutely. We were just chatting before, and I'm like, wait, let's just press record and have the conversation. So, the reason I wanted to have this discussion with Patience is because of her lived and education experience relating to military communities and military women, especially, and military families. And we are going to have this discussion about my audience for this purpose is going to be really not necessarily professionals, although we will have professionals who listen to the audience to the conversation. So we're going to think about like how we would work with or treat, but I really want us to understand more about the lived experience of people who are as a part of our military. And for this discussion, this is the United States military, but we will absolutely be able to extrapolate that information to other military families and communities. So let's begin. First, tell us a little bit about you. In addition to being military wife, tell me a little bit about your professional identity. Who are you?
Yes, well, I am Patience Riley. I am a lover of many things. I love plants. I love coffee. I love being warm. I'm very cold right now, but I love being warm. I should say I have a turtleneck on. But I am a licensed professional counselor. I'm based out of Georgia. That's where we're stationed right now at Robins Air Force Base. So I'm licensed in Georgia. I'm also licensed in Nebraska. And I was just sharing with Devorah that my family found out that we are going to be moving, or what we like to say with our military lingo, we received our orders for a PCS, so a permanent change in our duty station, and we will be moving to Sumter, South Carolina over the summer. So I have moved quite a bit. I'm also a Navy kid. So I've been a part of the military for literally since I came out of the womb. I've been just ingrained in this world. So both of my parents were in the military. Once my mom started having children, that's when she decided that she was going to get out because living, both people being in the military is really challenging. And then I met my college sweetheart, my husband. He had no desires to go into the military. And then look at him. He ended up joining. And then I ended up kind of seeing another side of the military as a military spouse and wife. And so it was really great for us to come back to Georgia because that's where I ended up graduating from my master's. And so I did not have to get my license in another state. But in addition to, training with Devorah, working for the Alliance for People of Color with PSI as their comms manager, I have a modest private practice where I see clients. I do serve military families as well as communities of color within my private practice and focus on that like perinatal period that you all hear so much about here
Absolutely.
on Devorah's podcast anyway. And I'm also a registered yoga teacher and registered prenatal yoga teacher. I teach at a local studio. I teach a class every week and also a pre and postnatal yoga class. I actually taught one yesterday. And when Devorah and I last trained together, we had people doing yoga poses on
Yeah,
there.
I may have coerced you a little bit into doing it, but I
It
think it's so cool.
it was great. And I even used one of the examples, the body examples that she shared. So this is why like I love spaces like this and where we can learn from each other as providers because I definitely had everyone in my class hold their neck back. And I was like, one of my colleagues taught me this. And so it just shows how we can do these simple little tips and tricks with each other to better serve and support the communities that we work with. So that's why I just really love talking about everything mental health and families because we take it all there. So I'm super excited about being here and just being able to, one, just chat with Devorah, but share all of this information with you all.
So I want to start with something that it's so funny because it rings interestingly to me. I remember I was once introduced to somebody and she said, "Oh, this is Mrs. Rabbi." And patients noted that I have moved many times in my life because my husband is the principal of a day school, a Jewish day school. And therefore, very often in the education world, you will move from position to position. And so I will jokingly say we've moved quite a bit around the country, but we're not military. But I remember when I was once met somebody, yeah, I almost bit her head off where she's like, "Oh, this is Mrs. Rabbi." And I'm like, no, that is not how I identify at all. And I'm wondering how you feel about I am a military wife. Right. So your identity in terms of the space that your husband works in and the professional milieu that you're in, you're identified as the wife of someone in service. And can we just start there? What that's like for you?
Oh my gosh, that's so we're also like, so we're talking about identity,
Hmm.
and that is huge. A colleague of mine, she actually started a brand and an organization called More Than a Missus.
Ooh, I love that.
And when she was saying more than a missus, like the tagline is more than a mil spouse, more than a military spouse, just because of what you said right
Mhm.
there, is sometimes that almost gets stripped of you. And I think it is very identical to what can happen to motherhood as well, because it's almost like when you marry in and you think about the military as a construct. So when we think about an organization that is almost more than a job, because it is a full culture, it's a whole entity, and it really goes into the family. Yes, my husband's in the military. Yes, he wears the uniform, but that identity that he now has, as far as his professional identity, that then gets put on me, but that's not my profession. Like my profession is a therapist, but I end up getting this identity that I didn't necessarily ask to be placed on me, put on me. And sometimes I've been in spaces where I've met people for the first time. They're just being introduced to me, and it's just, oh, you're just the wife. Like
Mhm.
he's the one that goes and does things. And I remember, I'm thinking about one instance in particular. Someone was, sometimes people get shocked also at my age. They think that I'm younger than what I am. My husband joined a little bit later, so they think that we were maybe just a little bit younger and joined earlier. But somebody was very shocked that I had a professional job.
Mm.
Like, because they were like, oh, well, most of the military spouses that I've met, that's not the case. And so I just let them know, like, hey, that's also just an assumption that we're making about people, because I also know lots of military spouses that have different types of lifestyles, different types of paths, whether it is stay at home, whether it is a career, whether it's being in school. And when I've started kind of navigating those, being a married person versus being a kid, I really felt that label of like, well, you're just his wife that just kind of follows and travels along with him.
Mhm.
And that's your first primary identity. And that was never my primary identity before then. And
Mhm.
I almost feel like it's not the one that I had on myself, but it's the one that other people put on me.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that's a different type of experience too.
Yeah.
The one that people put on you versus the one that you put on yourself.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. So when we're thinking from the lens of like culture of the military, for many people who are listening, they have no idea what we're talking about. So why don't we start with that of what is the culture of military? And for full disclosure, like I lived in Norfolk, Virginia. We lived in Arizona, but Norfolk especially was our primary exposure to military life. We had military members in our congregation and our community. I'll never forget when the aircraft carrier came back and like all the women are in the gym working out. I mean, it was so funny and also so exciting, like that people would go out to welcome the craft back and knowing that the spouses were going to be showing up in the gym the next day. I mean, that was my frame of reference, but there was definitely a much deeper understanding of culture because of my experience. And I'm wondering if I want to hear it from you. Like, how do you define military culture? And I guess it's maybe through the lens of women or mothers or families. What would that look like?
hmm Fun fact, my family and I was stationed in Virginia. So yeah, so when you said Norfolk, I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what base you're talking
You could
about. We were
probably say it properly also, because Norfolk is not the way they say it in
yeah, yeah,
Norfolk, Virginia.
yeah, yes. Yeah, so we were there as well. But like when you bring up culture, that is a huge piece. So one, when we're thinking about the military culture, first, let's think about what can we just see? Because a lot of times it's like that's one of the first things that people think of. They think of the uniform. They think about women having their hair slicked back. I happen to have mine slicked back today. Like it's slicked back. Everything is in place. Everything is proper, neat. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, ma'am. What's kind of coming out of our mouths? Very like strict, disciplined, everything being in order. Also, huge stigma.
Mm,
Stigma is very, very high. When I think about the lens of the family, and there is some research to back this up, that when one, let me take it back a little bit. When we think about like the values piece of the military and we hear the different mottos that our armed forces, the different branches share, a lot of it is like service before self,
mm,
like aim high, um, fly, fight, win. A lot of it is very much so focused on the mission, focused on the job. And when things are focused on that, they're not necessarily focused on the person, let alone that person's family.
mm,
And so when you're thinking like that's the culture, this is the oath that someone in the family took and they stood for, that kind of starts as like mile marker one. So you're kind of looking at that value systems, the belief systems, and how that it can extend down. And it goes even further than the service member themselves. It then goes into their spouse. Then that funnels down into the family. And so when you think about that culture, my husband and I were just joking today. He said, hey, I'm just a squirrel in your world and it's all up to you. And I said, absolutely. Actually, no, I'm the squirrel in your world because all of our decisions around our life get made around you. Everything gets made around this particular entity, this particular job, this particular profession. Even when we think about at the start of the day or the end of the day, when Reveille ends up playing, even little children jump off the swing and stand straight
mm,
because the song is playing. So that is things that are like culture that gets passed down. It's learned customs that happen. And that also goes around like with seeking help.
mhm,
And that's where that research part comes in that spouses have shared that they are concerned about seeking help for their mental health because they do not want to be the reason why the service member does not promote, why they do not advance. And so mental health stigma is already huge in society in general. Mental health stigma around parenthood, families, motherhood is high as well. And then it's really, really high with the military families. So then when you put all those things together, that's where it's like, well, why won't anybody go and ask for help? They're
yeah.
afraid. And it's almost because that culture has said you have to be mission ready. And by being mission ready, your family also has to be mission ready.
So I want to clarify what you're saying because I don't think that people understand this. That if a spouse has, let's say the primary person who's working is male and their
Yeah,
spouse, their female spouse is suffering from depression, right?
yes.
Or some kind of a diagnosis postpartum, that actually could impact the husband's either deployment or promotion or movement within the military. Can you clarify why that is?
Yeah. And so it's a fear that that could happen. Not
Okay.
that it necessarily can, but there's a fear that that could happen.
But is there actual risk? I mean, my understanding has been that you may not be able to, like, if you have a spouse that needs a lot of mental health attention, is not well, you may have like limitations in terms of advancement. Is that not accurate?
I think it's one of those case by case situations.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's
Yeah,
a risk. It would be considered a risk.
it's one of those case by case situations. And I do think that there has been lots of advancements in as things have gone
Hmm.
on with getting help. But there have been cases where, like, now that I'm an adult, like, my mom has shared with me, like, hey, someone who was working underneath your dad, he wasn't able to go out for his deployment because, come to find out, his wife was having some we just thought she was having some emotional health concerns during the time. And so he wasn't able to go out on that deployment. And then from him not being able to go out on that deployment, he didn't meet certain mile markers. And so I think that's where that then trickles down of that
Right.
concern and that fear of, I don't want to be the reason why they're missing out on opportunities to meet certain advancements of their job,
I-
right?
And I would say also like the shame of having to pull out of your regiment, like or pull out of your company, right? So you're everybody's been working together for this goal of deployment and then you have to step away. Well, there isn't just a random person ready to just step in your stead. So you really impact unit readiness if you cannot go when others are ready to go.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest thing. And
Hmm.
that's where, like, when I try to bring up like those models, like, just listen to those mottos. And it's always talking about you being ready to perform your job.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is the first and foremost that's at the forefront of everybody's mind. And so one may think, because I've heard some folks that have come and said, well, why is it difficult for the spouse to go? Like, they're not in the military, and it's for some of those reasons.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
sometimes it's also the unknown because things are so case by case, and you never really know that it's like, hey, should I just go see a therapist off base and pay cash?
Yes.
Because I don't want any record of anything. And so I do think that with those cases, things can get a little to the extreme side, but when you don't know, you don't know. And that's kind of the biggie I feel like with stigma and fear and mistrust is you're going off of somebody else's situation, what may have happened in those particular conditions. And then it just leaves people to not doing anything and suffering in silence.
And I think we have to acknowledge that that's for not only the spouses, but the identified, the military member as well. I did
Absolutely.
treat somebody off base in cash, no documentation. I had, and it was, and he was struggling with anxiety, like that hit out of nowhere. And I will not say anything more about his position in the military, but
Mhm.
it was something where, the threat of him coming forward was too high. And so
Exactly.
he thankfully sought care elsewhere. But we understood that if he were to go to his commanding officer and say, I'm really struggling with some anxiety, he would have been pulled right off his mission because it was high level, it was high clearances. It was like he was about to go. And it was like there was no space for, we'll take care of you, we'll help you figure it out. Like that is not a language that he understood that would be responsive to his needs. Could we talk a
Hmm.
little bit more about kind of the culture of mental health in general in the military?
Hmm. That right there. So I worked as a military family life counselor, and I worked specifically with like our maintenance squadrons, our flyers, as well as our security forces squadrons. And those, when you think about it, it's like different clearance levels. Our security forces is essentially like military police. So that's kind of like the easiest way to put it. With maintenance, you have to think about securing aircraft, like they
Mm,
are fixing, building. So when you're around like heavy machinery, working long hours, kind of like, and also being out on a flight line, doing work and having to work within teams and systems. And then others are flyers who have like those clearances, like Devorah was mentioning, and flying and having to be ready. So when you think about just the military in general and like that stigma of seeking help, nobody wants to be the person where something is wrong with me,
mhm.
where I, because it is a very much so like suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, put your game face on, and be ready for the mission, not showing that anything is going on internally. And so seeking help is really, really, really difficult. What I did love about that role that I had as a military family life counselor, or what we call an MPLAC, is we provided non-medical counseling, so things that were like adjustment related. If you're having difficulties adjusting to a new move or being a new parent or getting into a new ranking or position, we could see and work with you. And we didn't take any notes.
Mhm.
So when we think about that confidentiality piece, people get really nervous about going to mental health on their installation because there's a paper trail.
So
And that paper trail.
no notes at that's
Devar.
crazy. Patience, wait, how do you do that with your board? Like, okay, hold on, because like in my board requirements, right? If
Mhm.
I was somebody said, "Let me see your notes," and I said, "I don't have any," I would be sanctioned by the state board. Would
Mhm.
you say that the military rules would override state? I mean, you can't really say that. It's totally its own entity. How do you do that legally? This is so
So,
cool.
so that one, it was one of my favorite jobs. And if you're a therapist and you're like, I don't like doing notes, and you want to work with military families, this is probably
Come this way.
that's the job for you. So there was a DoD contract that was in place. So there's a DoD contract for the Military Family Life Counselor program, and it's spread across bases in the US as well as overseas. And it was kind of created in a sense to give military members support in mental health care without it being done through the mental health clinic on base. Because we know that our military families need support, but we also know that they're not going to get support because of that paper trail. And so, us as providers, you are somewhat you're protected because that's what's underneath the contract, essentially. So
Fascinating.
so you're able to log your encounters, is what you could call them, but you don't take name, you don't take birth date, you don't take social. And so one of the things I would do is a lot of outreach. And it would be explaining who I am and what I'm there for. And it's really hard to get people to trust you.
Sure.
So I would have a lot of what I would call hallway sessions
Mm. Hmm.
where I would really ask people how they're doing and I wanted to know how they were really doing. And they would then say, well, ma'am, you know what? This is kind of going on. And then next thing I know about their girlfriend. I know about the difficulties. We've talked about a couple of coping strategies and some things they could do. I'd run into them again in the hallway and they'd fill me in and say, hey, I tried that thing you told me about and it actually kind of worked out. And they would be real like, tell me about
Mm.
it. Or if somebody did come into my space because I worked really hard on building relationships, because I feel like with military communities, sometimes it is like seeing you often, seeing that you're not a threat, and also building like that community and relationship. And I would share with them, like, hey, I grew up in the military, my husband's in, blah, blah, blah. And so I also used my affiliation with the military as well as one of the ways to just kind of say, hey, I kind of get it. I
Yeah.
understand.
Uh-huh.
So some people they would say, hey, can my wife set up an appointment with you? And I was able to see spouses as well, or they would say, hey, we're having a difficult time. Do you mind if we meet with you? And
Mm-hmm.
then I'd be able to meet with the couple. And I think it's just some of that familiarity of like,
Sure.
hey, she kind of gets it. Her husband's also in, because I also did not work where my husband's squadron was. Like that was too like conflict of interest. But having that familiarity, I think also really, really helped
Yeah.
in this particular case of having that understanding of
You
I
speak the
get it.
language. It's also speaking the language. I mean, military has its own language, literally its own language. So,
Literally, the acronyms.
mm, yep, you have some good ones.
We have some, yeah, everything is an acronym for us,
Mhm.
but that I think was a really nice program to share with people as well. So if you all know of someone who's in the military and they're just like, I'm not going to mental health,
Right.
I'm just, I'm not going. One of the things that we would do is we would try to gear them towards the MFLEC program because there really is no notes. And people would sit in my office and they would say, ma'am, are you sure you like there's no notes?
Yeah.
Really?
No
Like they
trend.
would do the same thing. And I would tell them like there's 100% no notes that are here, but it's a free service.
And so if somebody would come to you, if a commanding officer or higher up in the
Mhm,
military would say to you, "Hey, I need to know, has Mr. So, whatever, Lieutenant so and so's wife come to
mhm.
see you, or is he ready?" You have nothing to offer them. You could say, "I don't know who you're talking
Nope.
about," pretty much.
Exactly, because we have to maintain that confidentiality as
Completely.
well. So all of the things still stay in place as far as what everybody's state boards, as far as their confidentiality and their breaches to confidentiality. So
Hmm.
you would still go over that. And then we would have to follow the procedures. But it would be if there was a breach of confidentiality that took place, you would then need to talk to my direct supervisor
Hmm. Hmm.
first, not theirs. And then it would follow that protocol of the program.
Okay, so before we get into women's health, the women's issues because there's so much there. I just need to ask this question. So, if there was somebody who you assessed in their mental health, and you were like, this person really is showing some significant instability, and if they continue to do their job, they would put other people at risk. Is that something that you then would break confidentiality on? I mean, like
It,
typically we're not dealing like if I was working with a
mhm.
surgeon and he or she was an alcoholic, I don't think that I would have legal rights to breach confidentiality to say to their boss or to call somebody or the police and be like, they're putting people at risk, even though people are going under the knife daily with somebody who's intoxicated. Is it any different in the military environment? If no.
I still have that same breaches to confidentiality that I would in my private practice.
Mm,
So if it was suicide, homicide, neglect, abuse, those are the
that's it.
times.
Yeah, but
Hmm.
not like danger to others would not mean if he flew or well, let's just say he flew or she flew,
Mhm.
that they would put the aircraft or those on the craft at
Right.
risk.
I couldn't breach that
Wow.
confidentiality.
Wow. That must be
Yeah.
hard to hold sometimes. I'm imagining it's rare, but that might be
Hmm.
really difficult to hold that information, knowing, especially if your husband's in that military, even if he's not in the same
Hmm.
squadron, like you have an
Hmm.
allegiance to the safety of the people that you love and care for. Such a fascinating
Yeah.
challenge. Hmm.
Yeah, and so that is, but I think that that's a great question because I think that's the concern that people get worried about seeking help. Because
Sure.
whereas that surgeon's like, hey, I can go and I can seek help, and there aren't any concerns about anything happening as far as job wise, I think our military personnel, there is that concern because, hey, if I was to go to mental health and somebody said, I think I'd like to put you on an antidepressant. Now, if I get put on that antidepressant, is that then going to get in the way of me being able to pursue my job? On paper, it may say so, even though when I'm out functioning in the world, I don't feel like it is.
Mm,
And so when that is kind of, either the stigma or the thought or the whole actuality of how it happens in the military culture, that could stop people from wanting to get help across the board. even for
Right,
minor things.
right.
Um, Even though, like I said, my breaches of confidentiality are the same for other folks as well. So it's kind of one of those
Yeah. So
like,
if
ugh,
you were prescribed, but if you were a prescriber, any prescription you would prescribe becomes part of the military record. Is that correct? Like if you were a psychiatrist prescribing, would that medication be on public, not public record, but professional record, right? Like if I'm working for an agency and I'm taking antidepressant, that's not going to be recorded anywhere and that's not reportable anywhere. But what about in the military? If you are prescribed through TRICARE, you are prescribed an antidepressant, is that information available to your commanding officer?
no.
Really?
So, or at least not that I'm aware of it being available to your commanding officer. And I think it also, we have to think about where does the prescription come from?
Right.
Are you seeing somebody that's on the installation or are you seeing somebody who's off the installation? Because that is also different.
Hmm.
So if you're seeing somebody who is on the installation, because there are still HIPAA
Yeah.
rules and HIPAA guidelines. Now, what all our commanding officers may or may not do to try to get access to that information, um, I'm not sure. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's one of those ones where it's hard for me to answer. But it's not as easy as like, hey, I get this, and then my commanding officer just pulls something up
Correct. Right.
and
Right. Right.
like that. There would have to be additional steps and processes and procedures.
Hmm.
However, I I have worked with several folks that do not want to go and get a certain prescription or even ask about it because of the what if. What
Right.
if somebody did take the steps? What if somebody did go through and someone found out because they're seeing someone on the installation?
Yeah.
Now, that's why I think sometimes we have folks that see people off the installation. When I
Right.
had my private practice, I also had folks where I said, hey, well, I work on base and I can see you that way. And they said, absolutely not.
No.
I'm going to
Yeah.
private pay you in your private
Yeah.
practice.
Wow.
And that wasn't even a medication.
Right.
That was just the therapy piece. Um, but I think when we think about it with our TRICARE records, so like for example, with our TRICARE records, that's our insurance company.
Hmm.
And so if our insurance company and our doctor is off base, that would take a lot more work for
Right.
somebody's commanding officer because one, they'd have to figure out that you're seeing someone off base. Second, they'd have to figure out who that person was. Then they'd have to reach out to them. And I think that's when it comes into having to like subpoena records and what does that look like. So whether or not someone would be trying to do that, that would take a lot more work and effort. It wouldn't just say, hey, because you have TRICARE and you get this
Got it.
medication, now an email
Got
comes to
it.
your supervisor. Mm-mm.
Good. And I think the reason that I get into the nitty gritty of that is because I think it helps us understand a little bit more of the worries and the fears that
Mhm.
people are living in the space are concerned about. Okay, I'd like to talk about the wives specifically versus
Mhm.
just the women, because we know that there are women who serve. But I want
Yeah,
to just focus in a little bit on the wives first of, one of the things that you mentioned is you're going to move and you're going to move
yeah.
in the summer. And, I can speak to my own experiences, but I much more interested in yours about like, there is this network of connection and support to women in the military, the wives of those that are deployed or serving or whatever. But that also means that every time you pick up and move, you start all over again in terms of relationships. And I just think how complicated, even if it's the communities are used to it, right? Like, what
Mhm.
is it like to have to pick up and start again? Even though you're probably picking up and starting again with other women who are picking up and starting again. But what is it like for you to have to start all over from a relationship perspective and from a support perspective and connection?
It is challenging, and I'm sure that's probably an understatement, like an
Yeah.
easy way of putting it. I always, like our past few moves, I've always felt like we've had to pick up and move right after I feel fully settled, held, and supported by the community that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like as soon as I'm like, yes, I have my footing, I have the people, like, I know who I can call for this, that. I know where I can go. I know all of the things, right? As soon as I feel really, really good in that and secure in it, I feel like that's when it's the time to move because it takes time to build support. It takes time to build community. And you also have to take an active role in that.
Yeah.
So, community doesn't just pop up at your doorstep. Like, you have to be a member of the community to get into community. But that can be difficult, especially when you're older, when you're an adult, and you have to be intentional about being in the community. When we were younger, we had to go to school. We had to go there. Like we had no choice. So maybe that was like your community space where you saw people hung out, and maybe it's like those extracurricular activities and whatnot that you go into. But as an adult, especially if you're working from home or if
Mhm.
your colleagues are virtual, that's why I'm like, Devorah, that's my colleague. Like we work together, but we don't live by each other.
Mhm.
And so with us also me working in a virtual space, I'm not necessarily around my community where they can see the whites of my eyes all the time. So
Yeah.
I have to go out into the community and essentially find support with other people and that's on top of other things. That's on top of learning the directions on the road of which way to get to the grocery store if I'm not living on base and going to the commissary or have to figure out that base. It's me finding my doctor. It's me finding my who's going to do my hair. Where am I going to get my eyebrows done? Where's the closest park? What's the best park? Because some, you like to go to others more than those. Where's the public library? What kind of things does that community offer? So you're like just figuring out your general things in life, your everyday things, on top of finding community, building community, going on maybe a couple of awkward first dates because you're trying to figure out friends and
Yeah.
making friends is a relationship.
And I just think
And
about
it
people who are so like maybe somebody who's more of a loner or more socially
exactly.
uncomfortable. Like that must be so difficult for them to have to pick that up. Yeah.
Uh, Absolutely. And it's everything is new again and it's a restart. And you're also sometimes navigating grief
Mm,
because you're leaving something and all losses can look different. And so for some folks, it's like, hey, I really don't want to leave where I am now. And so maybe you get to where you're going and you don't necessarily want to be there. So you're a little resistant. And so
mm,
maybe you start going out a little bit later than you usually would have because you're also still sitting in some of that grief of the place that you were before.
mm. What about for new moms? What are the things that you've noticed? I know that there's a lot of programs to support new moms in the military, but what have you noticed as kind of either as being a mother yourself or just helping other women? What are you noticing about their particular challenges?
hmm A huge thing is one, I don't know anybody
Hmm.
and I don't have support. Um, with us being military families, a lot of times we get pulled away. We get pulled away from that support system. So as you're growing your family and you're becoming a parent, a lot of times you're not next to that family member, those friends that can be there to physically support you. And it doesn't mean that they don't support you emotionally. They don't call you, they don't text you, they don't do all of those things. But physically being able to come and check on you, to wash a dish, do something with the laundry, make sure that you can take a nap. Sometimes you don't have that. And so when you're also trying to navigate, one, I'm trying to figure out what in the world am I doing as a new parent? Because I've never done this before. I've never done this with having this many kids. And I'm trying to do it in a space where maybe I'm not as familiar with, and I'm having to find all of the things around me again just to get my footing, then I'm also trying to make friends. And also with my identity, who am I?
Mm.
Who am I as this person's spouse, as this person's mom? And so it can really be a space of also trying to uncover yourself as well as you're transitioning into parenthood while you're also trying to develop relationships
It sounds
with people.
exhausting. Like it sounds like a full-time plus job. And then I also
That's
think
a
about like,
great way of putting it.
right? Like I also think that I think about your own, everybody who has children. So every time you move, you're not only resettling yourself and figuring out all the things you just listed, but you also have to attend to the needs of these
Hmm.
children and
Hmm.
and their social and their community and their schooling and their resettlement, right? It's quite a bit of responsibility.
Yeah, it's a lot of different moving parts all at once. Um, but it's one where I feel like it's helped to develop so much flexibility and adaptability
Mhm.
as well. Um, I like things to be in order. I like I like things to be in order. I like things to be planned. And this has really stretched me as far as being able to be flexible and go with the flow as much as possible because I'm realizing how many things are not in my control as well. And it has, it's been a very interesting ride as far as being this having my role as a military spouse, like how does that look at home? How does that look for my kids? How does that look with me in career? And there's been times where I've really had to adjust what I thought was going to happen because I was very much so career oriented and all of that. And you all will probably be like, it still seems like that. What? Um, but there was a time in space where after I had my first son and started having my second, I had to take a pause from work. I did. Like I had to just take a full on pause. I had my first son and we moved 3 times in 18 months.
Mm.
There was no space for work. As much as I longed for there to be space there because I'm good at it and it was something I was familiar with, I had to have a realistic conversation with myself. And I was like, this just is not your season where this fits in. And what I did instead is I had a season where my husband ended up being gone. I moved in with my parents for a little bit. And while I lived with them for a couple of months until we moved to our next spot, I spent a lot of time with my dad.
Mm.
I spent a
Mm.
lot of time with my dad. I ate good foods. I spent a lot of time with my son. I got out into my mom's local community as well. One of her friends invited me to like workout classes, and I started going to those. And I would do little pop-up things here and there that was related to the mental health field, was related to what I did to kind of get those little like to tide me over, as we would
Sure.
say.
Sure.
But I also had to figure out how to be flexible with myself to kind of meet those other needs of taking care of the home front, as us military folks would probably say, while my husband was gone. And
Hmm.
I kind of shifted when we moved again. I did some of that. And to try to build in on my community, me and Remy went to the library every Tuesday.
Right.
Went to the library every Tuesday. We did sing along. We connected with other kids, other parents. I joined a mom's group. I like, I I just said, hey, you kind of have to step away from this for this moment. Even though I so longed to be like therapist patients. Um,
But Patience, I think what you're acknowledging and kind of saying it without saying it is that he comes first, meaning like
he
he
comes
is going,
first.
his job is going, when you marry military and you go into the military, you understand that his job and his career will be priority. And
It
that can
is.
be hard for some very feminist, female centric people to hear. because we're being told we can have it all and do it all. And I think what you're acknowledging is that actually you can't. And sometimes there are seasons of the devotion to the home front will take priority over maybe my own career advancement. I have to imagine also, I don't even have to imagine it. I know that moving from community to community means you also have to develop new referral systems and new connections
Oh,
professionally and
yeah.
setting up a whole new patient base, right? I mean, telehealth has helped a lot with that, but if you're on a different time zone, it's not that easy. So,
Mhm,
really, like the establishment of understanding and choosing this place or this identity in your life for the either, I don't know if it's the greater good or if it's the greater commitment or whatever it is. It's like, I hope that for many women, or at least most women, there's a feeling of choice. Like, I chose this,
mhm,
and
mhm,
maybe like, I chose it and therefore I'm going to claim it and own it the way that I hear you doing it. But I
mhm,
also have to just acknowledge how it doesn't align with modern day, feminist values and what
mhm,
we've been told
mhm.
of like everybody can just go full steam. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and it takes some time to get there.
Yeah.
Because the life that I'm describing of what I did, oh, I was not necessarily the happiest person doing it. Even though like, it's like I was swimming against the current during that time. And so that's the thing. I can explain it so eloquently now and like
Sure.
describe it now. And it's 100%, you hit it right on the head. Like that, essentially that's what it comes down to. And that's why I told my husband, I'm like, no, our life revolves around you.
It does. Hmm.
And I think the thing is I had that understanding even from a kid. I
Hmm.
knew that our lives revolved around my dad's career. And so when I say it extends onto the family members, I know how that feels to extend onto a child.
Hmm.
And because I was a child, where it extended onto where my dad's job is what dictated the rest of our lives. And so
Right.
I think because I had that concept, even from just being a little girl, it was easier for me to grasp, but it was still hard for me to accept.
Hmm.
And and I was like, there's a way that I can have it all, right?
Right. Sure.
Because we've been told we can have it all.
Yeah.
But from me trying to have it all, I had a very, very difficult time transitioning into being a parent and especially being a parent of two.
Yeah.
Um, I had a really, really hard time mentally and emotionally with that. Um, and so I think it wasn't until I fully got to the point of surrender and I pick words for the year, y'all, like instead of instead of New Year's resolution. So surrender happened to be my word at one point. My last word for this year is release. And so just kind of taking on some of those things, it didn't happen overnight. So I know we may listen to this and it's like, oh, that sounds like that would have been easy to do. I was
Hmm.
really swimming against the current and resistant. Um,
Absolutely.
De Devora knows me and she knows how much I love what I do. So to have a time where I was just like, wow, I can't do this right now.
Right. I
That
mean, we talked
was
about that, like
hard.
if you were to deploy, like how would that work in terms of training? And I was like, wow, you'd be giving up something that you love and are really good at in order to, serve the greater good. So, mm, it's
I'm
not
so
easy.
happy I get to still train with you and
Me
not have to try
too.
and
Me
do it
too.
at like, I told her, I
Me
was like,
too.
Devore, I'm going to be logged on at like 3 a.m. looking at
Exactly.
everybody,
And you
hoping.
would. Let's finish our conversation because I know we can keep on going, but let's finish a
Yeah.
conversation with one or two misconceptions that people may have about military and mental health.
Mm, military and mental health. Let's see. Well, well, I want some of this because I also want to encourage our military families to seek help as
Yeah.
well. So there are providers that are out there that really do want you to get well. They want to be there to support you, and they don't want to, you know, report things back to your commander. Also, I have worked with higher leadership that really want their servicemen and women to be well,
Hmm.
to be well. So I know that this might be a case by case situation and basis by your base installation, who you're working with. But some of our higher leadership, they do want you to get help. They do want you to get support. So kind of a double fold with that
Hmm.
particular misconception out there that there's providers that want to support you and they don't want to just like snitch on you. And then there's also your leadership that does want you to get that help, and they're not trying to search and they're not trying to dig for those things out there. And then another misconception, I'm trying to think of one because that was kind of two. Um, with it, gosh, I'm just really big on that support for y'all. Your influx, they're not sharing your information. It's free support. Also, you don't always have to go to mental health for everything to get support. Even if someone may tell you that you need to go to mental health, you can seek other options. There's things like Military One Source where you can get placed with a therapist out in the community that's like in private practice, like Devora and I. And Military One Source works like an EAP, an employee assistance program, up to 12 sessions, and it's free for you. This
Hmm.
can also be used if you live overseas. Also, if you're working with the base, MFLAC could be used overseas. Also, you all look into different programs if you want to see somebody in private practice because you are saying, hey, patients, I get what you're saying, whatever, whatever, but I want to see somebody else that's off. People are willing to see you off base and have it be that private practice situation. We're just here to support you. And I want you to know that even though we're told like service before self and the military comes first, there would be no military without you. And
Agreed.
so you are deserving of support. You're deserving of help, regardless of what the military has ingrained or drilled into us, that the military comes first. You come first. You're deserving of the support. So I kind of want to debunk that military one, and that's just my own belief of debunking it, but you
I love
deserve
it.
support.
You do deserve. I mean, I think that is, it speaks to the idea that if there's no group if the self is unwell, right? There's flaws in the group if the self is unwell. So of course we're going to
Yes.
focus on that. I really love this conversation. I can't end it without thanking you for your service as a military spouse, as a military wife, and just as a person. First of all, spearheading this information around military families and communities and being willing to share this knowledge for those of us who maybe have no exposure to military lives. And I hope that it creates additional sensitivity to those of us that are maybe don't have exposure to the life that really is involved in keeping us safe and our country safe and many of our kind of relationships out there in the world that help keep other countries safe. I am grateful for your willingness to be a part of that, so thank you so much, Patience.
Thank you.